All right, okay, it's live now. Hi guys, this is Evan and this is Ben Bean. They're debating abortion today. We're going to start with Evan's going to give an opening statement really quick, and then we're going to bounce off of that.
Yeah, so I just have something small written here. The abortion debate is primarily a debate centered around normative ethics. In this debate, I think the burden of evidence is going to lie mostly on Ben, as we both, I'm sure, grant moral consideration to a fetus after it's developed subjective experience, but Ben would like to extend that moral consideration further back to conception. And so, in order to do this, you'd have to either A, give adequate reasons why respecting a zygote's right to life is preferable in normative ethics, or B, demonstrate how the subjective experience position that I hold is inconsistent or can be reduced to absurdity, especially when the stakes of this applied ethical debate revolve around eventually women's bodily autonomy.
All right, so let me just clarify. Your position is that a fetus has moral consideration or personhood when they have subjective experience.
Correct.
And is this like active subjective experience?
This is subjective experience that has been realized and that has been that exists in the world. So I understand that in cases in which there is a coma patient, they may be prevented from creating new subjective experiences, but their implicit memories still exist, which qualifies them as still containing a subjective experience.
All right, so go ahead.
Do you think life is inherently valuable?
I don't think it necessarily matters, because when you're talking about value, value is immeasurable, and mostly value is subjective. So if we're depending someone's human rights upon someone else's subjective value of them, I think that can be a slippery slope.
Well, by you saying of them, you are implying that there is a them, and in order to have any sort of like empathetical reasoning, you would have to have that thing would have to have a subjective experience, right? I would never refer to anything that is merely just alive, such as a plant, as being a them. I would only refer to thems as things in which I can actually empathize with them. But my question still technically stands. So under your view, is life not inherently valuable? Is that not what grants the moral consideration of humans?
No, I don't think value is what grants the moral consideration. I can kind of get to my whole explanation of this. It kind of comes a little bit later on. I just have a few questions to clarify your viewpoint on subjective experience. So, why does that only apply to humans? Because I mean, you are talking about humans when you're saying personhood, right?
Mm-hmm. No, not necessarily. I'm actually vegan and I believe in animal ethics as well. So moral consideration doesn't apply to humans for me, actually.
Okay, so you believe in equal human rights, right?
Rights has a very legal connotation. And I don't, my value system isn't necessarily rights-based, but in terms of moral consideration, do I think that all subjective beings have consideration when it comes to ethics? Yes. But
yeah,
not
I am talking about
equally
legal rights.
In terms of legal rights, for me that relies almost entirely on empiricism, as rights are an extension of means by which we get to greater ends for the rural utilitarian world that I aspire for.
Okay, so looking right here, we got 3 different people. I don't know how many people are watching, but let's just say, like 100 people. So out of all those people, there's people with vastly different intellect. There's people of different skin colors. There's men, women, people of different ages. So it's a very diverse group. I'm assuming, of course, but either way. And you would agree that we all have equal human rights, right?
With respect to the law, sure, we all have an equal right, like, for example, not to be murdered.
Right.
Sure. But I don't, that, again, that carries with it legal framework, but in ethics, I think you can actually have a scale. But if you're taking the opposite position, then that's going to lead you to a lot of different reductios, which I'm sure we can get into. But is that your position, that morality is equivalent across persons in terms of moral
no, not
value?
necessarily.
Okay.
I think there's two different arguments here. There's like a morality and then there's law. So the law doesn't necessarily have to apply to your specific morality. I'm sure you agree with that.
Like, does the law have to apply to my specific morality?
Or anyone's specific morality.
I mean, not necessarily. I would hope that the law has a ethical framework that is at least valid and that is at least something we can all agree upon, you know, when we enter
right.
civil society and pay taxes and so forth. But I mean, sure.
Okay, so in that case, we all have equal rights, so that's established. Like the equal right not to be murdered, the equal right to life. So what I'm thinking is when I'm looking at all these vastly different people, for them to have equal rights, they have to have something that represents that, and they all have to have it equally. So
no,
what would you?
no. That would be a non sequitur. Again, because when we talk about legal rights, it is implicit on whether or not the legality is actually having good effects in society. I use rights as a means to a better end. So I can say that, for example, a being with sentience or like subjective experience level, I'm going to use subjective experience level X or like a subjective experience level 100 may have a more moral worth than being Y with subjective experience level 1. But I can say from a legal level, we should probably grant them both the right to non-exploitation, the right to life, etc. But that doesn't necessarily mean that these traits are equalizable in a moral sense. Yeah.
I just think like if you want to assign human rights to certain people and give them equal rights, you have to be consistent and have like something that they all have equally where those rights actually apply, where they come into play.
I don't think that they need to have them equally, but that they all possess them, sure. And that would ultimately rely on subjective experience. But again, this is, I mean, this is what you're taking right now is sort of the normative ethical framework of how we work out in terms of like subjective experience, which is what I'm posing, and you're extending that as, oh, it must be representative of what our legal actions are or what our applied ethical framework is, which is totally separate from each other. But again, from your position, the burden of evidence primarily lies on you to demonstrate, because you argue both from a moral level and a legal level that all persons must have this equal right, correct?
Yeah. But I mean, my morals don't necessarily matter. Like, I mean, who cares about my morals? It's gonna be very hard. I mean, we could talk here like 3 hours about our specific ethical frameworks, and honestly, like I'm still working on my framework because personally I'm religious, so I have that. But I know like if I'm debating someone, I have to actually form a secular ethical framework, and that's still something I'm working on. So I can, actually like actively debate people on that. So that's why I'm trying to take more of like a legal standpoint, because I do think you can think abortion is ethical, but also that it should be illegal.
But you do posit that it is unethical, correct?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
So then why don't we argue about the normative ethics of this? Because I mean, if we want to go into applied ethics, it only makes sense to refer to empiricism on this case, because you may believe that rights are natural, but I'm only going to be using rights as a means given to an end. So we might not even have the same view of how rights should be used in terms of like government and so forth. But in terms of like normative ethics, we can actually hash this out, and we can get to what normative ethical system leads us to logical, or I mean, I guess not necessarily logical conclusions, but conclusions that we can all agree upon, right? So
Right.
if you're positing that all persons have this equal inherent right to life that cannot be like infringed upon, in terms of people who are in a permanent state of comatose that have lost their ability for sentience or subjective experience, rather, is it morally wrong for us to pull the plug on them despite them no longer ever under this hypothetical ever being able to experience again, or having it been lost?
If you're talking about like a literal hypothetical where you absolutely know they will not recover, so in that case they would be absolutely brain dead, I would consider brain dead to be dead. Now, if you're talking about like in real life, then there's often times where someone quote unquote recovers from being brain dead, but that's just, the doctors falsely labeling them as brain dead. So I do think there can be an argument made there to not unplug people.
Sure. But again, that's the applied ethical argument. I'm just trying to work out your normative framework. And so you posit that it would be morally okay to pull the plug on them, knowing full well it's a given in the hypothetical that you would that they will never have a subjective experience again, that they are theoretically brain dead.
Yeah, if they're brain dead, I consider that to be the same as
what is
literal
true
death.
So what is true in this case, which if true in the case of a zygote, would redeem it okay to pull the plug or abort the zygote?
So in this case, like when I'm saying this, there's the situations where you can or where you should keep them plugged in, then that would apply to the same as the zygote, because these are situations where where there's at least somewhat of a chance that they will recover from their current state.
Right, but that's not given in the hypothetical, right? I'm just trying to isolate what exactly about the case in which where for a fact they will not recover. What about that case, which if true in the case of the zygote was applied, that you would have the same consistent belief for both? Because to me, it seems as if a lot of their traits are actually equalizable. Neither have a subjective experience worth caring about. And in the case of the zygote, they've never had a subjective experience to begin with. So again, the question being, what is true of the case of which you would deem it morally acceptable to pull the plug on somebody in a permanent state of comatose that you could also apply to a zygote and that you would be okay with?
Okay, let me just clarify this. I want to make sure I don't go for the wrong thing. So are you saying like if I knew the fetus wasn't going to ever like further develop or something like that, like they're never going to become conscious, or they're never going to become an adult or whatever? Is that what you're saying? Or are you asking like where I would draw that line?
It can be that, right? But like, why? Okay. Let's actually start more simpler. Why do you think it is okay to pull the plug on somebody who has permanently lost subjective experience or is brain dead? Why do you think that's okay?
I'm not thinking of it from the point of subjective experience. I'm thinking about like their actual living self. So like I said, I consider brain dead to be dead. So
but they are living. Are they not a living organism? Are they not do they not qualify as being both a living person or a living human being? They're still a human being. They still rely on the same species as we do, and they are living. So they've met those two qualifiers, which seems to be the two qualifiers that you deem as being like the best in or you deem as being like good qualifiers for giving the zygote rights. So I'm just trying to understand, why is it that in this case they qualify, they meet that criteria, and yet you reject their moral consideration, at least with respect to pulling the plug?
Yeah, so what I'm trying to say is Well, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Okay, so when you're brain dead, like I mean, like you said, they're no longer going to have subjective experience, and I think that could be an argument in itself. But I think another argument would be one of the things that's wrong about killing, or one of the things that personally I think is wrong about killing, is that you're depriving a person of pursuing like future values and things that are valuable to them.
Right,
And
but in
you're
the case,
depriving them of future life, having a life like ours, being able to pursue pleasures and stuff like that. I think that's like one of the main things that's wrong about killing, because it's not necessarily that you're destroying their physical body. Because if I go into a coma tomorrow and I'm in a coma for 10 years and then I die, or if I just die tomorrow, that makes no difference to me. So it's not the physical body, but either way, I'm losing out on my future. I'm losing out on pursuing things that are valuable to me and having those experiences.
right, but you're aware that there is no desires to be had, or there is no like future in terms of like a zygotes, because what all things that you're referring to are derivatives of subjective experience, and this is what I actually wanted to get to, is that subjective experience in and of itself creates value, right? We can't make any sort of prescriptions on what we ought to do, what is something that is good, what is something that is bad, without a subjective experience. And because of in the case of the zygote, it's never had a subjective experience. And so to say, oh, I'm depriving it of its desires or something like that, it's never had desires or anything like that. It's never even had the capabilities of having the desires, because what is capable of having the desires is the subjective experience that relies on a fully functioning brain and nervous system, which doesn't come out at least until like 18 weeks. So
yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. Like, I agree with you there, but my argument is their future experiencing value, or I guess you could say subjective experience. So when you are killing someone, you're depriving of the future, even at that moment, if they are not desiring anything. Because I mean, you could make an argument for an adult that's not really desiring anything, like a suicidal adult or something like that.
Even in the case of a suicidal adult, they are having experiences and having preferences, whether or not those preferences are going to be bad, or whether or not those desires are going to be bad, or if their desire is literally to just sit on the couch and not have any, like, I guess, sort of meaningful desires, they still have desires nonetheless, because to have a subjective experience necessitates that you have sort of desires and wills. With the case of a zygote, it has never had that. It's to speak of something that hasn't even come into existence yet, right? And it would be like saying, it would be like saying, well, my little sister, like, she might want a doll, so I'm gonna like keep this doll, even though like my parents never had a girl and never plan on having a girl, right? You're referring to something's desires that doesn't even have an existence yet, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it just doesn't make any sense. The next level of just where I think that the pro-life argument fails is the sense of where what it can be reduced to. Like, what are the hypotheticals in which the pro-lifer must or often will concede? For example, if a 12-year-old girl is raped, would you be okay with penalizing this girl for getting an abortion, or would you say that it is not morally permissible for this girl to get an abortion?
Yeah, as far as like punishing women, that's a very touchy subject. Personally, I'm for handling things on an individual level.
Hold on.
Because
I'm not asking what we should do legally. The question is specifically, is it morally permissible for this person to do it? I'm not getting into the applied ethical side of this yet.
Okay, so morally permissible. I believe if there's going to be a situation that will result in both the fetus's and the mother's death, then there are ethical ways to remove the fetus without directly killing it. So if there's a situation like that, then yeah, I would believe that could be ethical. But if she's just aborting it to abort it, then I would consider that unethical.
Well, she would be aborting it considering it was forced upon her and she's of the age of 12. That would be the reason. But let me just, like, for sake of argument, let me just make sure I'm getting this straight. It is not morally permissible for a 12-year-old rape victim to get an abortion. Yes or no? That's all you have to say.
I would say no. But,
Okay.
I mean, that's an emotional argument.
No, it's not.
I'm going to be consistent on it.
Yeah, I'm glad you're at least honest and consistent, but it's more so for me to demonstrate to the audience and anyone listening who's even questioning that I can have a normative ethical system that is pro-choice, and I don't have to reduce my logic down to absurdities, or at least things that most people would find morally reprehensible, or things that are in nature, I would unequivocally say are vile, as vile is just something that is unpleasant, right? And the only beings in this situation is the woman or the girl who has to give birth. And so she's going to be the only one actually experiencing whether or not it's pleasant or not, right? There is no consideration of well-being. Because there is no well-being for the zygote.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I would just try to like counter that to a situation that might be similar to that, but more on your side. Like if there was a newborn baby, and let's say like a cabin in a blizzard, and there's a 12-year-old girl stuck in the cabin, and there's a newborn baby in there as well, and she can't get out for, we could say 9 months, or whatever period of time. I don't know if the period of time necessarily is that relevant.
Mm-hmm.
But if she has to like do something to feed the baby, and if it could be potentially even like say it could be painful or stressful to feed the baby, then I wouldn't say that she can leave the baby to starve to death.
So two things. Number one, this is disanalogous because already born baby does have subjective experience and already has moral consideration.
It's disanalogous to you.
Well, it's disanalogous. It's disanalogous if you were trying to prove an inconsistency with my moral framework.
Oh no, I'm not trying to prove an inconsistency.
Okay.
I'm just showing any
reductio, right? Because I can say, because also, well, let me just get to my second contention. The second contention is that I wouldn't hold a 12-year-old girl to be morally responsible with taking care of a child. I would hope that, like, if she has the capacity and ability to, that she would do that. But if this sounds like an extraordinarily stressful situation, I wouldn't deem her morally reprehensible for being just completely unable or mentally unable to taking care of that child. So the answer is no, I don't actually hold her morally responsible. But on to the other thing, it is disanalogous, right? Because my ethical framework works as in not without consideration of things that have no subjective experience or have never had subjective experience.
Right.
Yeah. So
are you against abortion after 18 weeks?
Morally, if it is, if there is, no like adequate sufficient reason, I'm against it. But again, it's on a scale. So if this is a rape victim, if this person maybe just didn't even know and it's just right around their 18th week, I might be okay with it. It does work differently with me because I'm a consequentialist, so it would have to deal with whether or not the situation like is just it just has an ethical outcome more so. But in terms of like, yeah, do I give it moral consideration after 18 weeks? Absolutely.
Okay, so you would be for her killing the baby if it was 18 weeks old. If it was our fetus. I'll say fetus.
In this case of a 12-year-old rape victim, sure. But I also understand that if it even got to 18 weeks, there's probably some material specific reasons why that even happened in the first place. As we all know,
I mean, we can make up anything, like she didn't have access to an abortion or whatever until then.
And then yeah, if there were literal material things preventing her from getting it, yeah, I would say that she's 100% morally permissible to get an abortion.
Right. So you're a consequentialist, right?
Mm-hmm.
So wouldn't you say that there could be lots of negative impacts of abortion on society as a whole that could make it better off if it was illegal?
I haven't seen any empirical arguments to suggest that, especially given the fact that criminalizing things related to bodily autonomy, as we've seen with drugs or things that have sort of some level of inelastic demand, as being generally ineffective, I would just have to look at the empiricism. But as of right now, I don't necessarily see that as being the case. And yeah.
Yeah, so I do think there can be a pretty decent argument made against abortion and consequentialism. So, for example, the mental health issues that women suffer from abortion, which are significantly worse than from giving birth. So, if you're talking about, like the mental strains on the 12-year-old girl, it could actually be much worse if she gets an abortion, and like any rape victim and any woman getting abortion in general.
The thing is my ethical system actually allows for her to stick with it so long as it's her choice. Your ethical system doesn't actually allow her to get the abortion, even if you knew that she was going to go through psychological trauma. So if I actually pose that argument to you that, let's say, we know her mental health is going to be deprived if she has this child, you would have to bite the bullet and say, yeah.
Well, I'm not a consequentialist, so that's irrelevant to me.
Right. Yeah, no, but my ethical system allows it either way. So if but I don't think that criminalizing that would be an adequate solution. I mean, what you're suggesting about the mental health thing, that's good that we should be looking at that. I care about women's mental health, but it would be absurd to take from that criminalizing abortion would be the beneficial or good thing to do because of that.
Yeah, I mean, for like what you said about my end, if the mental health thing wasn't on my side, yeah, I mean, if freeing slaves would cause like an economic crash and people would go into poverty and starve to death, that wouldn't change my mind, because I'm looking more at like human rights and stuff. I believe their rights should be protected, and often that can be more important than the consequences.
Well, I do want to clarify my specific consequentialist framework is rule utilitarianism. So I think that rules are a great metric by which, like I said, rights are a great metric by which we can use to achieve an end. I think that a lot of rights, such as freedom of speech, etc., freedom to the right to life or whatever, are good means to achieving an end. So I would also agree with slavery, even if it was economically flourishing for a certain subsection of a society. But I understand the deontological framework. But again, I think that nothing about my position has led to absurd abstractions or reductios.
All right, so are you for like anti-discrimination laws?
Generally speaking, sure. Yeah.
Okay, what is like your general viewpoint on discriminatory abortions?
I think they're wrong insofar as the fact that somebody having a discriminatory abortion is doing so because of their racism or ableism or sexism, etc. Right? So if somebody has a baby, I don't even know at what point you can determine the gender of a child, but let's just say, like, theoretically, you can know the gender of the child at conception. Let's say somebody conceives a zygote, and then they observe it to be a woman, and then they say, okay, I want to abort it. They abort it. I'm not morally against it insofar as the zygote's concerned. I'm morally against it insofar as the person is sexist for doing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like the issue I have there is, there's not just sex discriminatory abortions. There's also ableist abortions. Theoretically, you could come up with hypothetical discriminatory abortions. Like in the 1990s, some doctors thought they found like a gay gene, and they could like identify a gay baby in the womb. Yeah. So you could make up a hypothetical where you like the Deep South is basically genociding gay people before they're born. And right now that's actually happening with people with Down syndrome. The abortion rates for Down syndrome fetuses is like 70% in the US. In some countries like Scandinavian countries, it's up to 90% and even higher. There's no kids with Down syndrome being born. So that's a big issue I see with that is abortion in general. You're legalizing eugenics. You have legal eugenics going on, and there's not necessarily anything you can do about that without being inconsistent with your abortion beliefs.
No, there is. You can obviously fight ableism and fight sexism and fight racism through other fronts. The answer to that wouldn't be criminalizing abortion and taking a woman's right to choose. The answer would be to fight against the stereotypes or the misconceptions about people with Down syndrome, or obviously people of other ethnic or racial backgrounds. I agree that that is wrong, but it is not wrong to me for the same reasons. It is wrong because that person is doing that so with oppressionary intent, rather than doing it purely for the sake of like their own well-being. But I can also do the same too, because you're against anti-discrimination laws, correct?
To an extent, yeah.
So wouldn't you be legalizing businesses to make racist decisions or sexist or ableist decisions on who they serve or who they employ? Wouldn't you be effectively legalizing that?
Yeah, that's basically an entire other debate that we don't really have time for.
No,
yeah, I could have a debate on discrimination.
I understand that, but I assume that you would just hold the position that it's not in a business's best interest to be racist or sexist. I mean, I'm just inferring.
Most of the time. It's not,
yeah, exactly. So I would obviously deny that empirically, but I would suggest that it still allows for it in the same way that this allows for discriminationary abortions or whatever, but it's not wrong because the zygote has moral value. It is wrong because the person doing so is doing so on a prejudice.
Right. Okay. We don't have a ton of time. I might go a little bit longer than I was planning on because this is kind of going by super quickly. So let's go ahead and go back to like subjective experience. I had a few more things I was going to say on that, but we kind of got distracted. So can you like define subjective experience?
I would say that subjective experience is, first of all, it necessitates a functioning brain and a functioning nervous system, and I would characterize it as the ability to perceive or contend with things on sort of a psychological level. I can get a more precise definition if I look it up. Do you mind if I Google the definition?
If you want to, yeah. You mentioned earlier like desires. Would you put that in there?
I would say that desires are usually a product of subjective experience, but I don't know if I would necessarily use that as a part of the definition.
So would a lack of desires be a lack of subjective experience in itself, or?
Would a lack of desire be a lack of to not necessarily. I get, because I suppose you could posit situations in which somebody's subjective experience has still been kept, such as somebody in a coma, but they don't necessarily have desires. But even within those subjective experiences, those implicit memories, right, they have desires about their memories to keep their livelihood, to keep this, to do something.
Right. So like if you had
Maybe
desires
not.
in the past, right?
Yeah, but I wouldn't put that as part of a necessary component.
So I could be mistaken, but I'm pretty sure babies don't necessarily have desires, like in the traditional sense. Like not like actual thought out desires, because I mean that would be a desire. Like I mean
no,
they
of
want
course.
food, but that's more like a want. It's like a thing that's ingrained
That is-
in there, but it's not like a thought out desire.
See, but I would characterize that as being a desire. So maybe I just mean something different when I say desire. But if you mean by well thought out desires, obviously, I don't think that that is like what is a quality that somebody needs to be like morally. Mind you, I'm vegan, so like
Right.
something with, even if it never has the ability to eventually like gain like some higher level understanding, like a chicken, I would still say that that thing has desires.
Yeah, I think like the actual definition of desire is like wanting after something and wishing for it. So if you're wishing for it, then you're making like a conscious drive towards it.
Sure.
So I would
doesn't
definitely say a newborn does not have that.
I would just fundamentally disagree. I think that repeat what you said, the last part, that it's a wish, and
Wishing towards something, yeah.
It's wishing towards something, and that they're making a conscious like effort. I mean, I would say that they would be making a conscious effort toward. I mean, it's not conscious in the sense that they understand all of the nuances, like what food is, what it does to them, how it's characterized, but they understand that they're hungry. Like they have an understanding that something is wrong, that they don't. I guess, but if you don't, if that doesn't necessarily meet the definition of desire, then I just wouldn't use. I would no longer.
Right. They're hungry, but it's more of like a natural feeling. They don't understand specifically that they need to eat or why they need to eat, what will happen if they don't, because they don't really understand their own existence. Like they're kind of aware of their own body, like they can kind of pass some of the self-awareness mirror test, but as far as like their own existence, they're not really aware of it. You know, like there's animals that are aware of their own existence, like you mentioned earlier, like elephants, they're aware of death, and an elephant will actually come back years later to the site of another elephant's death, so they have like a very decent understanding of existence itself.
Yeah, I mean, but again, desire isn't even necessarily like a qualifier. I just think that desires is usually a product of subjective experience rather than like a necessary feature of it. I would say that subjective experience, though, is my ultimate qualifier on what grants something moral consideration.
Would you at all put personhood on like a scale, or is it just a fixed thing? Because usually people don't put it on a scale. It's usually put as a fixed thing. Like you have it or you don't.
Yeah, I'd say it's probably fixed, as in like you either have a subjective experience or you don't. But I mean, certainly, certainly things have a higher capacity to experience more than others. So I mean,
right. Yeah, like an elephant would have more than a newborn baby.
Right, but it is binary in the sense that things either have it or they don't. Sure.
Right. So, yeah, like I just said, elephant has more subjective experience, and those things that might qualify it as a person than a newborn. And I'm still not really sure if a newborn would really fall under that. I mean, I don't remember everything you said as far as subjective experience goes. Would you mind like repeating that?
Yeah, sure.
Your view on subjective experience.
So subjective experience requires a functioning brain and nervous system. It's just the ability to not only like perceive, but actually have, I guess, here, I can just look up experience in philosophy. I don't know. I can't find a super precise definition that I think would be sufficient, but anything that honestly has a functioning brain and nervous system would have a subjective experience, as these are like sort of the necessary pre-components to have that experience. But it is a type of perception.
Mm-hmm. So would you think you would have like the same reaction to like 100 elephants gathered in a field and shot, or 100 human beings gathered up in a field and shot?
I think that they're both morally reprehensible, but I would.
Yeah, I mean, I would say so too. But
I would say that the human beings case would be morally worse. Sure.
So why would that be?
Their capacity of sentient subjective experience is just higher than that. Their ability to understand with their own like sort of suffering is greater. Their appreciation for not only suffering but pleasure, and this is where it gets back to utilitarianism and one of the baselines being hedonism.
Okay, so by like what you just explained, then gathering up 100 newborns in a field and gathering up 100 elephants, it would be more morally incomprehensible to shoot the elephants.
See, in terms of like on a vacuous level, sure. But generally speaking, I understand that newborns have a greater amount of meaning to actual adult humans. And so in an everyday world, no, that actually wouldn't be the case, because it would actually cause suffering to the greater amount of human society, whereas the elephant happening wouldn't be to the same extent. But on a vacuous level, sure. But both are extraordinarily morally reprehensible, right? This is like asking, like, well, I mean, what's worse, like the Holocaust or slavery, right? It's like it's putting things on a moral scale that we can technically do, but it doesn't make much sense, as we obviously both deny them.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say, killing a bunch of elephants for no reason is pretty morally incomprehensible, because I think that pain is a very big thing. I don't like things going through pain, even if they're not humans. But where I draw personhood is being an individual member of rational kind. So like I would put in like, if like Yoda from Star Wars was here, I would say he would be a person.
Okay.
And then at the same time, I would say Baby Yoda would be a person, because he's also a member of a rational kind.
Member of a rational kind. So what about? So wait. What does rational kind extend to? Is that only extended to humans on planet Earth?
No. Like I just said, like it would extend to like any rational kind, really.
It would extend to animals.
Something that can like act morally, and
can dogs act morally?
Act morally? I don't really think so. I don't think dogs can really develop morals and then act upon those morals.
So do you have no moral consideration for dogs?
Oh no, I have moral consideration, because I think pain is another area of moral consideration. I just don't think it's personhood.
So it's okay. So, but the subjective experience does matter?
Not necessarily. I would say.
So what is there a case in which
I don't know if a subjective experience really matters to me at all, really.
so what is there a case in which subjective experience is not present that something has inherent value or more?
Like someone under general anesthesia.
But they still do have the what's it called? The intrinsic or not intrinsic, the I guess it would be intrinsic, but the necessary memories or subjective experience still within them. Their subjective experience hasn't been lost. It's only been hindered from creating new experiences, right? So that would be a case in which subjective experience is still present, and it's still present on a secondary level because
so then it would still be present in that way with a brain dead person or someone in a coma.
Yeah, but they've no longer been real. They're incapable of ever realizing it again, right? So it would the subjective experience, I've said that word so much. The subjective experience of that person has been actually lost because it can never be realized again. So in the person of somebody who can actually realize it again and hasn't been lost, it is still there and it is still meaningful because it can be actualized and realized. But in the other person, it is. So it is as good as gone.
Mm-hmm. So like someone in a coma, would you say that they have the same moral consideration of someone under general anesthesia?
I don't know the.
But actually, again, I can still make the argument that you really don't know for sure, like 100%. It's not an absolute for certainty. Sorry, I said that way too many times. That the brain dead person will not recover.
I mean, sure, but we can still talk in hypotheticals.
Bean, it's been 45 minutes. Do you want to keep going, or are you?
It's been a fun conversation, actually. It's been fun. I'll go relatively soon. We can kind of talk a little bit more, though.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I'm fine with that. But yeah, I mean, we can still like create conditions in the hypothetical, right? In order to. Yeah, so of course, in reality, we may not actually know, but we can still grant certain hypotheticals, and I'm pretty sure it's been pretty well demonstrated that obviously people's memories and the person that they are is still intact because when they come out, they still know who they are, and even if they've lost a tremendous amount of memory, they're still able to do plenty of like functioning things in being a member of society. But
would you go ahead? Go ahead.
No. That was it.
Would you grant moral consideration to someone with amnesia and then put under general anesthesia?
Amnesia and then put under general. Doesn't amnesia just mean that you've like forgotten other people?
You've forgotten like your past. You can remember like language and like kind of basic things, but like your past desires, your past experiences, which I mean that's kind of what you stressed about, like experiences. That stuff. It depends on the level of amnesia, of course.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, you can lose that.
Yeah, but I would suggest that they still have the levels of experience because they still do remember like things like language and everything like that.
Well, it does depend. There is people. I don't know if it's necessarily amnesia, but you can forget everything. There's people like that who've had to learn literally everything from scratch as if they were a baby. And you could make an argument that someone is in a car crash and gets their head damaged, and then they're put under general anesthesia for surgery or something. And then at this point, if they don't have that criteria for personhood, then the doctor may not be obligated to like finish the surgery.
Well, obligating like the doctor, again, that like gets into applied ethics, and I would just suggest as a general preface that doctors should be doing their job and helping patients. But in terms of like whether or not they've retained personhood, like they may have lost it at some level, but again, that their subjective experience still exists, and I would posit that in order for them to permanently lose every single like memory and everything like that, their brain would have to diminish to the size of what it was when they were born, right? Because brain development is created like with experience. That's why it works as a muscle. When you learn certain things, right, your brain actually actively changes. So those changes to the brain have been made via experience, and those changes are still present in them. Their brain would like actually like physiologically have to be turned back to an 18-week-old fetus.
Yeah.
I mean, and that like crazy hypothetical, sure. And I mean, maybe we could not give them the same moral consideration.
Yeah, you can come up with the hypotheticals all day, really. But yeah, I definitely should wrap it up now. It's only 5 minutes over, but yeah, it was definitely really fun. Like I enjoyed it. I liked hearing different arguments. That will help me prepare for my debate with Vosh tomorrow. I don't know how deep he's gonna go, but yeah, I think that's gonna be a fun thing. But yeah, I actually really appreciate doing this, and it was a lot of fun. Going into the deep conversation and stuff. So yeah, thanks for doing this and putting me on, guys.
100%. All right.
And sorry for the people watching that we didn't get all heated like you guys wanted. I saw some comments like, this is too boring news section.
I was waiting for a little
I don't think I've ever had a heated abortion debate. Actually, like lately I've had, very nice debates, or pretty much it just goes into discussions most of the time where you're just like, talking about philosophy and, bring up all these hypotheticals and stuff like that. And it's actually, pretty enjoyable.
Definitely.
Yeah, awesome. All right. I guess I'll just end this
sure.
now then.
All right.
If we're all good.
Awesome. Thank you.